I made a video yesterday about names and words and things. Now we have this tendency to make, it's not even tendency, it's an inevitability really, about turning the world into things. You know, because at the scale we operate, the middle-sized objects moving at middle speed, as Dawkins says, you know, the physics that operate at that speed are Newtonian physics, broadly speaking, and our interpretation, the way our body interprets Newtonian physics, through our senses and through the cognitive processes that do something with those senses, is by turning it into things. So a buzzing cloud of atoms turns into a tree. A tree. Very nice dish too. Because that's the best representation of that buzzing cloud of atoms, or the most useful representation of that buzzing cloud of atoms, in terms of how our organism, this middle-sized organism that we are, can interact with it. Okay, so physics is dramatized and interpreted as the world, and the world at this scale is a series of things. So that means, or largely a series of things doing stuff in space over time. But I guess that must mean is there must be part of our cognitive mechanism, must be a kind of thing-making machine. You know what I mean? Thinging. We must be thinging all the time. A thinging ringing tree. See, that's what it's doing. Thinging. And we must have, I'm pretty sure we have actually, I think I've read about this. We must have part of our cognitive mechanism which takes this buzzing cloud of atoms, takes data from the senses and makes it into things. And that must be its job. Yeah, I'm assuming there's something modular going on in the brain with this, by the way. And it's thinging all the time. In fact, Eugene Dechille and Andrew Newberg talk right about this. They call it the holistic operator. And elsewhere I think it's been called binding, and there's different kinds of terms for it. And that's the process, which on a perceptual level allows us to, you know, just see fragments of things. And like I can only see half my dog right now because it's having a piss behind that tree here. But I know, just from its front end and its back end, I know there's a dog there. So I'm kind of thinging the whole dog, turning the whole thing into a thing, just by little bits of it. So I'm thinging the dog. And similarly, all this stuff, all these trees are obscured by other trees and their branches in the way. But I don't see fragments, I see the whole thing. And my ability to do that must be because my holistic operator, or those cognitive binding mechanisms, are turning fragmentary perceptions into things. Yeah. But also, conceptually it's doing the same thing, isn't it? You know, I look up in the sky at night and I see Orion's belt. I don't know how that came about. You know, these stars are bazillions of years apart, and bazillions of light years apart. But, and yet there it is, straight line just pops up and I can't not see it. And my inability to not see it is a result of the strength and the power of my holistic operator, or my cognitive binding mechanism. So it's just turning it into a thing. And the same thing with stories, and the same thing with people, and the same things with any process-based things. You know, this stuff just keeps turning into things. So it seems to be almost incontinent. I've got an incontinent thing-making machine in my head, I think, which, designed by evolution to stop me walking into clouds of atoms that would hurt me, by representing that clouds of atoms as trees, thinging those clouds of atoms into tree form. But it's still doing it. But it doesn't just confine its activities to buzzing clouds of atoms. It seems to do it with anything. So that part of my cognitive mechanism is constantly making things up, I guess, and giving them permanence and solidity. You know what I mean? That it keeps tending to make them solid, and keeps tending to make them permanent. Even if they're just ideas. Yeah, I think even if they're just ideas, it's doing that. Because I think it's not just working through the sensors. It's not just that the data from my eyes is doing that, and the data from my ears is doing that, and the data from my fingertips are doing it. It's not just that data. I think it seems to be working on the data produced by other parts of the brain. You know, like my memories, for example. I've got memories of different things happening over different periods of time in my life. But they're kind of thinged for me. They're turned into a thing which I call my life, or my story, or something like that. Know what I mean? So this holistic operator, this thing-making machine in my head, is also operating on the data from another part of my head, which is my memory, and making things out of that. All the Christmases, there's one thing, there's a thing about Christmases, and so on. But I think what it's also doing, that thing making also seems to be working on abstract concepts, because part of my head, part of my brain is also abstracting concepts. Like, for example, good and evil. Good and evil are abstractions. An action can be good or an action can be bad. Not sure of the word evil. Let's stay with evil because it's funny. But you know, actions can be good or actions can be bad. But somehow part of my head is abstracting the general idea of good and evil. Good and evil, generally. Detached from the action. I've just got this general idea of what good and evil is. But I think the other part of my head, the thing-making engine, kind of acts on that data sometimes. You know, there's a line in a David Byrne song, good and evil, they take on, put on faces and they turn into people. Good and evil, they put on faces and they turn into people. You know, it's almost as if my thing-making machine is taking the data from my abstracting machine and turning it into a thing. So good and evil become a thing. In fact, not only in that case a thing, but an intentional thing with agency and a face. And even, you know, really abstract concepts. Like yesterday I was talking about being. How being is such a weird word and a weird idea and almost a religious word. And I think it is in a sense. Not religious in any kind of conventional sense. But there's something going on there, I think, with my thing-making engine. It seems to be taking some of the data about existence, you know, the fact that these things exist, abstracting this idea of exist and turning it into a thing. You know what I mean? You could even put a face on it if you were religious. You know what I mean? You put a face on your being thing, and suddenly you've got a god, haven't you? I guess. But even if you don't do the face thing, even if you just non-consciously allow the being to become a thing, seems to me you're well on your way to thingology, theology, the thingness. Actually, I made a video a while back about this, and it feels very repetitive. You know, because things, nouns, objects, they have particularly direct objects. Indirect objects usually with an A at the front, so, or an, like an apple, which could be any apple. But if it's a specific object, you begin THE, the apple. So you point to it, the tree, the dog. Look, there we am, look, the dog, there, see that, look. The dog, there he is. Seems to me like I'm ologizing the direct object, a thing to the dog, and now I'm putting a the at the beginning of it, and that's part of my theology. I suppose I'm playing on the word theology here. But if you take being generally and allow that part of your brain to construct being as a thing it, make it a direct object, point at it and say the thing, the being, then suddenly you've got theology. Yeah, big theology. Yeah, I should say something about Garden. I won't do it now. Garden of Eden, knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, something about that. Imagine I said that.